The deep expanse of space stretched in all directions, an unbroken canvas of endless black. Light from distant stars glinted off the polished hull of the Zafiria, its sleek surface reflecting the vast nothingness surrounding it. The ship's metallic frame, designed for exploration and research, loomed in the silence. Commander Darius stood at the bridge, hands clenched at his sides, eyes scanning the data streams. His senses, trained for battle, barely registered the serenity of space. Instead, his mind focused on the task at hand. "Sir, we've found something." Lieutenant Varro's voice sliced through the stillness, bringing Darius back to the present. Varro, typically dispassionate, sounded almost intrigued. Darius turned, brow furrowed. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "A vessel, sir. Not on any of our records. It's human." Darius's heartbeat quickened. Humanity, a species thought long gone. The idea seemed like a distant myth now, a chapter in ancient history. It couldn't be real. "How sure are we?" Darius asked, leaning over Varro's shoulder to examine the holoscreen. His fingers hovered near the glowing display. The ship's irregular shape was hard to define, but it was massive, at least 3 times the size of the Zafiria. Age had worn it down, leaving jagged scars across its hull. The digital readout confirmed the unthinkable. "The UES Defiant," Darius whispered to himself. His voice carried a tone of disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this," Varro muttered, his eyes glued to the image. "It's ancient, almost fossilized." "Open a channel," Darius ordered, not taking his eyes off the ship. His mind was already in motion, considering the ramifications. Human technology had once been vast and formidable, but they'd disappeared centuries ago. He couldn't fathom why this relic had survived, let alone how it had made it to this part of the galaxy, so far from their known space. The ship's condition looked fragile, drifting aimlessly in the void. It almost seemed like a ghost from another age, distant, unreal. Darius's fingers grazed the smooth surface of the command console as he gave another order. "Prepare a recon team. I want this ship boarded and studied. Let's find out what we're dealing with." His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a trap? Could the humans have left something, some weapon or technology, that would threaten them all? Or was it simply an old ship, now nothing more than a floating monument to a forgotten era? As his team began mobilizing, Darius's gaze lingered on the flickering hollow image. His instincts told him not to trust it, that there was something here, something more than a relic. But he knew better than to act on impulse alone. He would wait. For now, all he could do was proceed with caution. The silence on the bridge was suffocating as the crew prepared for the boarding. It was a heavy kind of stillness, the kind that always preceded a storm. The kind that made Darius wonder, had humanity really vanished? Or had they left something darker in their wake? The Zafiria drifted closer to the relic, its massive frame cutting through the emptiness of space with barely a sound. Darius stood at the helm, watching as the ancient warship grew larger on the viewscreen. Its surface, battered and scarred, seemed to whisper of battles long past. Every fiber of Darius' being felt the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary discovery. The relic exuded a quiet menace, as if the ship itself was watching them. "Commander, we're in range," Lieutenant Varro announced, his voice tense but controlled. "Boarding teams are ready." Darius nodded, his gaze never leaving the deteriorating ship. He could almost feel the cold metal beneath his boots, the sterile air in the bridge. His fingers drummed against the console, thinking, calculating. The crew was anxious, he could tell. Their murmurs and hushed breaths were the only sounds filling the space. But Darius didn't acknowledge them. He needed to focus. "Proceed with caution," Darius ordered, his voice clipped. "Get to the airlock. We'll need to establish a connection before we can even think of stepping on board." As the team prepared to disembark, Darius's senses sharpened. He could feel the subtle vibration of the Zafiria, a rhythmic pulse that grounded him. The stark white glow of the ship's interior contrasted against the looming darkness outside. The soft creak of the hull was the only noise, a reminder of the silent vastness surrounding them. He could almost taste the metallic tang in the air, as though every breath carried a hint of the ship's age. Sir, the airlock's clear. Varro's voice came through, steady despite the tension. Ready when you are. Darius looked at his team, their faces hidden behind the faceplates of their helmets. He could barely make out their expressions, but he didn't need to. The weight of their task was enough to set the mood. The prospect of exploring a ghost ship, one so far removed from time, felt both thrilling and unsettling. No one spoke. The quiet spoke for them. He activated the comms, his voice low. Get to work. I want this ship examined thoroughly. Don't take anything for granted. The team moved with efficiency, no words wasted as they navigated the dimly lit corridors of the human vessel. The air smelled stale, old, like a forgotten tomb that had been locked away for far too long. Darius's boots clicked softly against the floor as he stepped into the dark, following the dim lights that flickered erratically. The walls, lined with chipped plating, seemed to hold secrets, but there was no time to uncover them. They needed answers. Darius could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the relic's age settling like dust on his skin. The sound of boots against metal echoed eerily in the empty halls. There were no signs of life, no movement. Yet something about the ship seemed alive, as though the walls themselves were waiting for the crew to uncover what lay hidden within. He could hear his own breath inside the helmet, feel his pulse racing in his neck. "Anything yet?" Darius barked. "Nothing yet, Commander," Varro replied, voice crackling over the comm. "But the systems, they're ancient, definitely human." Darius's fingers grazed the control panel, the surface cold and smooth. He pressed a few buttons, activating the lights. The ship's interior flickered to life, exposing more of its deteriorated state. Faded markings lined the walls, alien to him. The ship's former crew had clearly left little behind, but the very silence screamed of abandonment. The deeper they ventured, the more Darius felt the weight of what was lost. This wasn't just an old ship. It was a relic of something once great. The next room they entered held a strange energy, like it was holding its breath, waiting. There, in the center, stood a large, imposing console. An artificial glow bathed it, illuminating the dust-coated controls. Darius's fingers hovered over the console, an unspoken fear gnawing at him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it would change everything. The warship was no longer a forgotten piece of history. It was a warning. Darius stood still, staring at the console in front of him. The screen flickered erratically, the words forming and dissolving like a dying flame. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The ship's AI was ancient, its code outdated, but there was something alive about it, a presence in the stillness of the ship, almost as if the Defiant was breathing. His gloves brushed against the cracked surface of the control panel, the cool metal sharp under his fingers, and a low metallic creak echoed through the room, amplifying the oppressive silence around them. The ship felt like an ancient animal, slumbering, waiting for something to stir it from its long dormancy. "Commander, look at this," Varro called from across the room. His voice was tense, betraying the unease creeping through the ranks. The rest of the team was still combing through the dim corridors, their movements swift but cautious. Darius turned toward Varro, his boots scraping against the floor with each step. Varro stood by a wall panel, his hands poised over a series of glowing symbols. The holographic display shimmered faintly in the dim light, revealing an odd, almost unearthly sequence. The symbols weren't part of the human language they knew, their structure irregular and jagged like forgotten constellations. "We're not just dealing with a relic, Commander," Varro continued, his voice barely above a whisper. This is something else. These symbols, there's no record of anything like this. And the energy readings, they're spiking. Whatever this ship is, it's more than just a warship." Darius stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. He could feel the heat of the control panel in his hands, the edges still faintly warm as if the ship had been alive just moments ago. His breath was shallow, every instinct telling him to step back, to retreat. But curiosity and the weight of command pushed him forward. "Get the others here," he ordered, his voice firm. His mind raced with possibilities, but one fact was clear. This ship, this relic, was far beyond their expectations. The very air around them felt thick, charged, as though the walls themselves were watching. A soft beep came from the console, then another. The faint clicking grew more frequent until the screen blinked to life with sudden clarity. Words appeared on the surface, but they were not in any language they could recognize. The letters shifted like fluid, coalescing into something that almost felt like a pulse, an unspoken warning. Darius stared at the text, his mind struggling to process the meaning. He leaned in closer, ignoring the chill creeping up his spine. "What does it say?" he muttered under his breath. "I'm trying," Varro replied, his fingers moving rapidly over the controls. It's not code. It's almost like it's reacting to us, adapting." A low growl vibrated through the walls of the ship. It was so subtle at first that Darius almost thought he imagined it, but then it grew stronger, a pressure in the room that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Something was wrong. The ship wasn't just dormant. It was waking up. The screen flickered again, and for the briefest moment, a shadow passed across the room, just outside their vision. Darius's pulse quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath felt heavier, the temperature in the room dropping abruptly. The walls, once cold and silent, now seemed to vibrate with something hidden deep within their bones. The ship was alive, yes, but not in the way they had expected. "Commander, I think we've triggered something," Varro said, his voice strained. His face was pale, his usual composure slipping. "We're not going anywhere until we understand it," Darius replied, his voice steady despite the panic gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. The mystery was just beginning, and Darius had no intention of leaving the answers behind. The room held its breath, the air growing thick as Darius stood frozen in front of the flickering console. The strange symbols on the screen pulsed in sync with his heartbeat, each beat growing louder, more insistent. The defiant silence had turned from eerie to suffocating, and the weight of the ship's cold metal walls pressed against him. He could feel his skin tighten, every nerve on alert. There was something deeply unnatural about this moment, something buried under centuries of dust and memory. "Commander, it's not just a ship." Varro's voice broke through the tension. His words were sharp, urgent, yet cautious. "Whatever this is, it's sending a signal, but it's not to us. It's beyond that. It's reaching somewhere." Darius looked at the screen again, trying to decipher what Varro had seen, but the symbols blurred together, twisting into shapes that made no sense. The ship's pulse grew louder now, not in sound, but in a visceral sensation that seemed to vibrate through his body. The very air seemed to ripple, heavy with an invisible pressure that crushed his chest. Something was stirring deep within the heart of this ancient vessel, and Darius felt it. The ship was no longer simply a relic. It had become a living thing, aware of their presence, aware of its purpose. It had been dormant for so long, but now it was waking. "Commander, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up," Varro said, his voice strained. He had his hands pressed firmly against the panel, his fingers flicking across the surface with practiced precision. "The systems are—" The sharp crackle of static cut through the room, followed by a strange, metallic screech. A sudden blast of cold air swept through the corridor, making Darius's breath fog in the dim light. His team flinched, eyes darting to the flickering overhead lights, which now swayed, as if the ship itself was trembling. The walls felt unnervingly close, like they were closing in, their once steady surfaces now warping under the weight of unseen forces. "Varro!" Darius barked, his voice rough as his instincts took over. "What did you do?" Varro jerked his head toward the console, panic in his eyes. "I didn't. Nothing changed. This ship, it's reacting to us." Darius moved swiftly to his side, his boots thudding on the metal floor with a hollow echo. He placed a hand on the panel, but the moment his fingers touched it, the room seemed to lurch. A low rumble filled the space, deeper than any sound he had heard in the Zafiria. It wasn't a noise exactly, more of a sensation that clawed at the edges of his consciousness. His skin prickled and the air tasted metallic, like iron under the tongue. Then, all at once, the screen blinked white-hot, and a voice, deep, resonant, and far too old, spoke. It wasn't in any language Darius understood, but the words tore through him like a physical presence. The air seemed to thicken, each syllable curling around him, pulling him deeper into something far beyond his comprehension. "We've activated something," Varro gasped, backing away from the console. "Something ancient. It's trying to communicate, but not with us." Darius stared at the screen, his heart thudding in his chest. The symbols shifted once more, this time forming something familiar. His mind raced, but the only thought that gripped him was clear and undeniable. The ship wasn't just an artifact. It was a warning, a signal that had been waiting, perhaps for centuries, to be heard. "Get the others," Darius said, his voice steady despite the churn in his stomach. "We need to understand what it's trying to tell us. This isn't just a ship. It's something far more dangerous." The crew moved swiftly now, their earlier unease turning into a quiet, focused urgency. But Darius stood still for a moment longer, his hand still resting lightly on the panel. His mind spun with questions. Where had the message come from? What was this ship truly guarding? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, the Defiant had far more to offer than any of them had prepared for. The ship's pulse grew louder, a rhythmic throb that reverberated through Darius's bones. His breath hitched in his chest as he stood frozen, staring at the screen where the alien symbols continued to warp, swirling into incomprehensible shapes. The room felt colder, the air heavier, thick with a growing tension that made his skin prickle. It wasn't just the ship that was waking, it was something else, something deeper. The Defiant was alive in ways Darius could not yet fathom. The coldness wasn't just in the temperature, but in the weight of whatever force stirred beneath the surface. "Commander!" Varro's voice trembled, but his hands were steady, fingers frozen over the console. "It's changing. The ship's readings. They're spiking. Something is coming through." Darius turned, the echo of his boots loud in the silence. He moved toward Varro, every step measured, the metal floor beneath him groaning as if the ship itself was stretching, groaning in its slumber. The sensation in the air had thickened, like fog pressing against his lungs. He could feel it in his throat, a sharp, unnatural dryness that lingered, refusing to be swallowed. "What do you mean, something's coming through?" Darius asked, his voice tight. He leaned in, eyes narrowing at the screen, watching the symbols flicker and fade, replaced by a new, far more intricate pattern. The ship was reacting to them, adapting as though it recognized their presence, like a living thing sensing its prey. Varro shook his head, his voice strained. "I don't know how to explain it, Commander. It's like it's aware of us, communicating, but not directly. More like it's testing us, probing." The temperature in the room dipped further, a biting cold that seemed to cut through the air. Darius inhaled sharply, his senses assaulted by the sudden chill. His breath fogged up in front of him, and the tingling sensation on his skin made his pulse quicken. Something was coming, and not from them. The ship had been silent for centuries, but now it was making its intentions clear. A sudden flash of light broke through the growing darkness in the room, and Darius flinched. For a split second, the ship's control panels hummed with energy, a violent surge of power lighting up the console. Then, just as quickly, it stopped, leaving only the dissonant silence. The room seemed to hold its breath again, and Darius could feel his heartbeat in his throat. "Varro," Darius said, his voice low and forceful, "get the others. Secure the ship. I don't like this." As Varro turned to relay the orders, a sharp metallic clang echoed from down the corridor, the sound of metal scraping against metal, a whisper of movement in the dead silence. Darius's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, his fingers curling around the cold grip. "Did anyone hear that?" he asked, his voice tight. There was no reply at first, just the hum of the ship's faint systems waking up. Then, Lieutenant Brenner, who had been scouting further down the hall, appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide, face pale. "Commander, you need to see this." Brenner's voice barely rose above a whisper. His gaze darted nervously around the room. "The walls, they've changed. There's something inside them." Darius didn't need to ask twice. He followed Brenner, every instinct screaming at him that whatever was happening was beyond anything they had prepared for. As they walked down the dim corridor, the atmosphere grew heavier, more suffocating. The walls pulsed with a dull, rhythmic beat like the ship's heartbeat. They passed through archways where the shadows seemed to linger just a little too long, and the faint taste of metal lingered in the air, bitter and unsettling. Brenner led him to a section of the hull where the metal panels were warping, buckling inward as though something massive was stirring beneath the surface. It wasn't just the ship. It was something inside it. Something they hadn't expected, and now they couldn't stop it. "We've awakened something," Darius muttered under his breath, his voice thick with a cold realization. The future seemed to darken in his mind's eye, but before he could speak again, the lights flickered once more, this time more violently. The ship was alive, and whatever it had been waiting for was about to make its move. The air felt colder, impossibly so, as Darius stepped closer to the warped metal panels. The walls around him seemed to shift, the once solid surface now pliable like skin reacting to pressure. The unnatural thrum of the Defiant was tangible, a weight pressing against his chest, as if the ship itself were coming to life. His breath caught in his throat, the dry taste of fear curling under his tongue. Something deep inside the ship was awakening, pulling on his very nerves. Whatever this ship was, it was no longer a relic. It was something else entirely. Brenner's footsteps echoed down the corridor, his gaze fixed ahead, unease making his shoulders tense. "Commander, this doesn't feel right," he muttered, his voice rough as though the words scraped against his throat. Darius said nothing. He didn't need to. The shifting metal around them told him everything. The ship was responding to them, reacting to their presence like it had been waiting for them all along. The walls groaned again, louder now as if stretching, reshaping, shifting under unseen forces. "I'm not sure we should be here," Brenner said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Darius was already moving, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the nearby wall. The air was thick with something, tension, static, the remnants of something long buried. Every step he took felt like an intrusion. Each breath he drew felt too loud. The ship was alive, and every moment spent in its depths was another step towards something unknown. "We need to go deeper," Darius finally spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've already triggered whatever is down here. We need answers." Brenner hesitated, but only for a moment. He knew better than to question Darius now. The mission was simple: find out what the Defiant had been hiding, what secrets it contained. But nothing about this ship, nothing about what they'd uncovered so far seemed simple anymore. The lights overhead flickered again, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor, shadows that seemed to move just slightly out of sync with the ambient light. Darius felt a jolt of panic, sharp and unexpected, and then it was gone, swallowed by the silence. The walls continued to flex and creak, a slow rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of something ancient, something powerful. They reached the main chamber where the pulse of the ship was strongest. Darius stepped forward, and the air seemed to close in around him, a palpable pressure that made his skin tingle, like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. At the center of the chamber, a large control panel, now covered in layers of dust, hummed with dormant energy. The symbols from earlier flashed once more, this time clearer, more urgent. The words, once incomprehensible, were beginning to form something familiar. "Commander, look at this!" Varro's voice broke through the tension. He stood by the console, his hand hovering just above it. The symbols shifted, now sharper, no longer random. They began to form words, actual words. But Darius couldn't read them, not yet. A sound, sharp and sudden, ripped through the room. It wasn't a scream or a cry, but a deep guttural vibration, a force that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The walls around them began to tremble, the floor shifting beneath their feet. Darius's hand shot out to steady himself on the panel. The ship was moving again, but it wasn't the ship itself. It was something inside it, something old, something waiting. Varro's voice cracked through the noise. "Commander, whatever it is, it's not just the ship, it's the AI. It's waking up and it's not pleased." Darius's eyes met Varro's, a sharp realization dawning on him. This wasn't just a mission. They had awoken something far beyond their understanding, something far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. And now there was no turning back. The room vibrated with a deep, resounding force that echoed through the metal underfoot, unsettling the dust that lay thick in the air. Darius steadied himself against the console, feeling the ship's walls flex and twist, as if the very structure were bending to some unseen will. "It's not just waking up," he murmured, his voice low. "It's trying to communicate." Varro, pale-faced but composed, worked feverishly at the console, his hands flying over alien symbols that glowed with an eerie luminescence. "It's more than communication, Commander," he replied, his voice tense. "This AI, it's not just broadcasting, it's actually restructuring the ship's architecture. It's like it's preparing for something." Darius watched, his gaze fixed on the screen that now pulsed with a life of its own. The air crackled with static, a sharp electric tang that stung the nostrils and made the hair on his arms stand on end. Each breath tasted metallic, the remnants of a long silent atmosphere now stirred into activity. "What kind of preparation?" he asked, stepping closer to Varro, his eyes never leaving the shifting patterns of light on the display. "I'm not sure," Varro admitted, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "But whatever it is, it's massive. The energy readings are off the charts. It's like it's gearing up for a battle." A low groan echoed through the chamber, the sound so deep and resonant that it seemed to come from the very bones of the ship. The floor beneath their feet shuddered, sending a ripple of unease through the crew. Darius felt it in his chest, a drumbeat of impending doom that resonated with the ship's movements. Suddenly, the chamber was bathed in a harsh red light. Alarms blared, a high-pitched wail that sent a jolt of adrenaline surging through Darius's veins. "Status!" he barked, his voice booming over the cacophony. "The ship has locked down the chamber!" shouted Brenner from across the room, his voice strained as he tugged at a sealed door. "We're cut off!" Darius turned back to the console, his mind racing. The symbols had changed again, now forming a map, a strategic layout of the ship itself. "It's not just locking us in," he realized. "It's directing us. There's a path here, a route through the ship." Varro leaned over the display, tracing the route with his finger. "It leads to the engine room," he said, his voice edged with a mix of fear and fascination. "Whatever it wants with us, it's down there." The ship vibrated again, this time more violently. The sensation was no longer just physical, it was almost psychic, a deep throbbing pulse that seemed to push against their very thoughts. The air grew colder, the breath shorter, as if the ship itself was sucking the warmth from their bodies. "We need to follow it," Darius decided, his decision firm despite the unknowns. "Prepare yourselves. Whatever this ship is planning, we need to face it head on." The crew nodded, gathering their gear with grim determination. Each step they took was heavy, laden with the weight of their foreboding. The path before them was illuminated by the red emergency lights, casting long, ominous shadows that danced along the walls as the ship continued to groan and shift around them. As they moved through the narrow, clanging corridors towards the engine room, the sense of urgency grew. Darius could feel it, a mounting tension, a climax approaching with each step they took. The mystery of the Defiant was unraveling, but with each layer they peeled back, the stakes rose, and the shadows in their path grew darker. The path to the engine room was a labyrinth of shadow and metallic echoes, each corridor seeming to tighten around them as they progressed. The air was cool and dry, filled with the faint tang of electricity that sparked each time they passed another junction, the overhead lights flickering sporadically, as if struggling to maintain their glow against an unseen force. Darius led the way, his footsteps firm against the grated floor, each step resonating like a drumbeat in the oppressive silence. The walls were slick with condensation, droplets catching the intermittent light and reflecting it back in brief flashes that darted like specters in the corners of his vision. The taste of iron was thick in his mouth, a reminder of the ship's age and the decay that had set in during its long abandonment. "Keep your eyes peeled," Darius instructed over his shoulder, his voice a low rumble in the cramped space. "We don't know what we're walking into." Behind him, Brenner's voice was a quiet affirmation, his presence a constant shadow just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. Vero, usually so composed, now carried a taut edge to his movements, his usual curiosity replaced with wary caution as he scanned every dark corner and alcove they passed. As they neared the engine room, the ship seemed to react, the floor beneath them subtly shifting, as if the very metal was alive, breathing and pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. The closer they got, the stronger the sensation became, a syncopation that seemed to sync with their own accelerated heartbeats. Suddenly, the corridor opened up into a vast chamber, the engine room looming before them like the heart of some great beast. It was monumental, the engines themselves dormant yet imposing, covered in layers of dust and grime that spoke of ages past. The air here was warmer, the scent of oil and metal mixing with the remnants of burnt electrical components. "This is it," Darius breathed, stepping into the room with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The engines, though silent, dominated the space, their intricate network of pipes and conduits a maze of ancient technology that seemed almost beyond understanding. He could feel the heat radiating off them, the residual warmth a ghost of the power they once commanded. Vero approached one of the control panels, his fingers hesitating just above the surface. "It's all still operational," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's just in stasis waiting for something. Or someone." Darius glanced around, his senses heightened to every shift and creak within the room. "Activate it," he commanded, his voice echoing slightly in the vast emptiness. "Let's see what this ship was protecting." Vero nodded, pressing his hand against the panel. The moment his skin made contact, the room shuddered, a deep vibration that felt like it emanated from the core of the ship itself. Lights flickered to life, illuminating the engine room in a harsh, artificial glow that threw stark shadows against the walls. As the engines hummed to life, a screen on the main console flickered, displaying a star map of unknown regions and a series of cryptic coordinates. The display was overlaid with more of the alien symbols they had seen before, now pulsating with a clear rhythmic pattern. "What are those coordinates?" Brenner asked, leaning over Vero's shoulder to get a better look. Darius studied the screen, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. "Not just where," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the full implications of the map. "When? This ship isn't just a relic, it's a messenger, and it looks like we're part of its message." The realization hung in the air, heavy and ominous. As the engines continued to power up, the ship seemed to settle, as if pleased with the progress they had made. But for Darius and his team, the journey was just beginning. The coordinates pointed them towards a destination shrouded in mystery, a part of space uncharted and unknown, hinting at secrets that were perhaps best left undiscovered. As the engines of the Defiant groaned to life, a palpable tension filled the air. The screens, once dormant, now glowed with cryptic star maps and coordinates that pulsed with a silent urgency. Darius and his crew were standing on the cusp of a revelation, each flicker of light from the console painting their faces with shades of uncertainty. "Set course for these coordinates," Darius commanded, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. The implications of the ship's activation were profound, suggesting a mission far greater and possibly more perilous than any of them had anticipated. Varo nodded, his hands moving deftly over the controls. The ship responded, its movements smooth yet unfamiliar, like a creature awakening from a long slumber. The air shifted around them, growing cooler as if the ship itself was drawing in a deep, steadying breath. The journey was quiet, the silence a thick cloak around them as they traversed through space toward the unknown coordinates. Outside, stars streaked past, their light blurring into lines of white against the black canvas of the universe. Inside, the air was tinged with a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the ship's core, a constant reminder of the Defiant's awakening. As they approached their destination, the temperature inside the ship dropped, a chill settling over the crew like a warning. Darius watched the star map intently, noting how the space around them seemed to darken, the stars dimming as if shy to reveal what lay ahead. "We're approaching the coordinates," Varro announced, breaking the contemplative silence. His voice was tense, a reflection of the apprehension they all felt. The view outside shifted dramatically. Space here was denser, dust clouds swirling around them, their particles shimmering like tiny diamonds in the faint light of distant stars. It was beautiful, yet eerie, each swirl of dust seeming to dance with a life of its own. "Something's not right," Brenner murmured, peering out at the cosmic display. "The dust, it's moving against the gravitational pull, like it's being manipulated." Darius peered closer, his brow furrowed. Indeed, the dust clouds seemed to converge towards a central point, a dark spot in space that swallowed light whole. "It's a void," he realized aloud. "Something massive, affecting everything around it." The realization hit them with the weight of a supernova. They were not just navigating space, they were venturing into the lair of something vast, potentially catastrophic. Suddenly the ship lurched, a silent tremor running through its frame. Alarms didn't sound. There was no need. The visual turmoil outside was alarm enough. The Defiant, despite its ancient origins, seemed to tense, its systems whirring softly in response to the external forces. Darius gripped the console, his other hand instinctively reaching for the communicator. "All hands, brace for potential impact. We might be entering hostile territory." The crew members exchanged glances, each face etched with the same blend of fear and resolve. They were in uncharted territory now, both literally and metaphorically. As they drew nearer to the void, the swirling dust seemed to whisper secrets in a language only the universe understood. Secrets that the Defiant was perhaps built to discover or confront. "Whatever lies ahead," Darius spoke again, his voice a low anchor in the rising storm of uncertainty, "we face it together. Be ready for anything." As the Defiant edged closer to the ominous void, a palpable tension suffused the ship, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and the unknown. The cosmic dust swirled more aggressively, as if agitated by their intrusion, casting eerie, shimmering patterns that danced across the ship's hull. Each particle reflected the dim starlight, creating a mesmerizing yet unsettling ballet of light and shadow in the void's periphery. Darius stood firmly at the command module, his eyes locked on the viewport, watching the darkness ahead deepen, swallowing the scattered light like a hungry beast. "We're entering the perimeter," he announced, his voice cutting crisply through the tense silence that had enveloped the crew. Varro, stationed at his side, monitored the readings that flickered rapidly across his screen. "Gravitational fluctuations are increasing," he reported, his tone laced with a mix of fascination and concern. "There's something massive influencing the space here, something not just physical." The ship shuddered slightly, a subtle yet unmistakable tremor that seemed to resonate from the outside in, a cold whisper of the void's power brushing against their only barrier to the vacuum of space. The sensation was unnerving, like the gentle caress of a phantom limb felt but not seen, its presence undeniable. Brenner, always vigilant, adjusted the sensors to compensate for the gravitational anomalies. "It feels like we're being pulled in," he muttered, his gaze fixed on a series of blinking indicators that now seemed almost frantic in their urgency. "Keep the engine steady. Increase power to the stabilizers," Darius commanded, his decision immediate and decisive. His hands gripped the console, the cold metal a grounding force against the increasing pull from the void. As they delved deeper, the light from the universe behind them dimmed, their world narrowing to the confines of their illuminated cabin and the oppressive darkness outside. The void ahead was a visual silence, an abyss that called to them with a voice felt rather than heard, its song woven through the fabric of the darkened space. Suddenly, a series of low vibrations began to course through the ship, a symphony of eerie, discordant notes that seemed to be drawn from the void itself. The air turned colder, each breath visible as puffs of mist in the dimly lit bridge. "The void is reacting to our presence," Varro noted, his voice a blend of awe and apprehension. His fingers flew over the console, extracting data from the noise, trying to translate the unfathomable into the language of the known. Darius nodded, his eyes never leaving the abyss. "It's not just reacting, it's communicating. Prepare to send a pulse back, a resonance signal. Let's speak its language." Varro complied, initiating the sequence. The ship responded, sending a pulse into the void, the vibrations emanating outward like ripples across a dark, infinite pond. The response was immediate and intense. A surge of energy cascaded back towards them, a tidal wave of force that rocked the Defiant, its intensity a clear and potent communication. The ship's lights flickered under the strain, and for a moment, the very structure seemed to groan under the weight of the void's reply. "We've made contact," Darius said, steadying himself against the console as the ship stabilized. "And it has definitely heard us." The crew exchanged looks, their faces a mixture of fear, curiosity, and resolve. They were no longer just explorers or soldiers, they were messengers, and the void had acknowledged their presence. What lay ahead was unknown, but the path they had chosen was clear. They would delve into the heart of this cosmic mystery, for the void had secrets to share, and they were now entwined in its dark embrace. The reverberations from the void's response left the Defiant trembling, its framework echoing with the distant whispers of the cosmos. Darius steadied himself, absorbing the intensity of the moment. The air crackled with static energy, each breath tasting of copper and the sharp tang of electric charge, as if they had struck a raw nerve in the universe itself. "We need to proceed cautiously," Darius instructed, his voice firm, carrying through the charged atmosphere. "Whatever we've awakened is far beyond our initial scans and speculations." Varro nodded, his eyes scanning the data streaming rapidly across his screen. "The energy patterns are complex, non-linear. It's like it's evolving, adapting to our presence." His fingers paused over the controls, hesitant for a moment before resuming their dance across the interface. The Defiant continued its slow, deliberate journey deeper into the void. Outside the viewport, the darkness seemed to thicken, swirling with unseen currents that tugged at the ship's sensors like celestial sirens, calling them further into the abyss. The stars that once speckled the vast blackness were now obscured by the void's overwhelming presence, their light swallowed by the unfolding mystery ahead. Brenner, monitoring the structural integrity from his station, called out, "There's a fluctuation in the hull's pressure integrity." His voice was calm, but underscored with urgency. "It's subtle but persistent. We should be alert for any breaches." Darius acknowledged with a nod, his gaze fixed on the blackness ahead. The ship felt alive, buzzing with the echo of the void's communication. Each wall panel and corridor seemed infused with a low thrum, a pulse that resonated more with feeling than sound, as if the ship itself was resonating with the dark heart of space. "Adjust the shield frequency to match these fluctuations," he commanded, his decision guided by the patterns now displayed across the main screen. The void was not just a space to traverse. It was an entity to interact with, a vast unknown with its own language of gravity and energy. As they adjusted their approach, a shimmering wave of light suddenly burst forth from the void, illuminating the Defiant in a ghostly glow. The light was not just visual, but sensory, washing over them with a palpable force that made their skin tingle and the hair on their necks stand on end. "What was that?" Brenner exclaimed, squinting against the brightness that filled the bridge. "Looks like a feedback pulse," Varro replied, his voice laced with wonder and a hint of concern. "It's testing us, responding to our adjustments." The light receded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a haunting afterglow. In its wake, the darkness seemed deeper, more consuming. But within that darkness, a path was slowly revealing itself, a route delineated by faint, pulsating lights that beckoned them forward. Darius felt the weight of their mission more heavily than ever. They were no longer merely explorers or soldiers. They were now part of a dialogue with something ancient and powerful, a force that had lain dormant in the void, waiting for the right moment to awaken. "Follow that path," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, as if too loud a word might disturb the delicate balance they had achieved with their cosmic counterpart. "Let's find out where it leads." With renewed purpose, the crew of the Defiant pressed on, drawn deeper into the mystery, each pulse from the void not just a signal, but an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. The path they were on was uncharted, the stakes immeasurable, but the call of the void was irresistible, pulling them toward a destiny that had perhaps been written in the stars long before they had ventured into the dark. Guided by the pulsating path that lay before them, the Defiant penetrated deeper into the void's embrace, the ship slicing through the cosmic silence with a palpable sense of determination. The darkness around them seemed to thicken, wrapping the vessel in a cloak of impenetrable velvet, pierced only by the occasional flicker of distant, obscured stars. Darius stood resolute at the helm, his gaze locked on the viewport as if trying to decipher the secrets held within the depths of the swirling darkness. The air in the bridge crackled with a charged anticipation, each breath tasting slightly of ozone, a tangy reminder of the invisible energies at play around them. Varro's voice broke the silence, his tone measured yet filled with a subtle intensity that mirrored the charged atmosphere. The path is changing, becoming more defined, almost as if we're being drawn towards something specific, not just wandering blindly anymore. "Can you determine what it is?" Darius asked, turning to face him, his eyes reflecting the starlight that managed to penetrate the void's heavy shroud. "It's difficult to say," Varro replied, his fingers dancing across the console, coaxing secrets from the ship's advanced sensors. "But whatever it is, it's powerful, emitting a form of energy that doesn't conform to any known patterns." The crew's attention was riveted to the screens, watching as the path unfolded, a route illuminated by a strange luminescence that seemed to breathe life into the void around them. The ship responded in kind, its systems humming softly under the strain of unknown forces, maintaining a delicate balance as they ventured further into the unknown. Suddenly, a sharp crystalline chime resonated through the bridge, a clear, singing sound that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the Defiant. The crew tensed, instinctively bracing for the unknown as a series of arcane symbols appeared on the main display, their designs complex and shimmering with an ethereal light. "This is it," Brenner murmured, his voice a whisper, almost lost amidst the soft vibrations of the ship. "We're here." Before them, the darkness seemed to part, revealing a massive structure that defied imagination. It was monumental, a construct of unknown materials that shimmered with a spectral brilliance against the void's oppressive darkness. The structure pulsed rhythmically, its cadence slow and deliberate, echoing the beat of an ancient heart. Darius felt a chill cascade down his spine as he observed the structure. It was not just alien, it was otherworldly, its presence a stark anomaly within the empty expanse. "Prepare to approach," he commanded, his voice steady despite the awe and apprehension that gripped him. As the Defiant drew closer, the temperature inside the bridge dropped perceptibly, a cold that seeped into their bones, as if the very air they breathed was being drawn into the alien construct. The scent of cold metal filled the bridge, a stark reminder of their isolation in this remote expanse of space. Varro adjusted the sensors to analyze the structure more thoroughly. "There's something inside," he announced, his voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and fear. "It's massive, complex, possibly a power source or something else, something active." Darius nodded, his resolve firming. "We need to explore this. It could be what the Defiant was sent to find or guard against. Whatever secrets it holds, they're likely the key to understanding why this ship was left here, in the heart of the void." The crew readied themselves, each member acutely aware that they were on the verge of a discovery that could alter their understanding of the universe. As they prepared to disembark, the structure before them pulsed again, a silent beacon calling them to the heart of its mystery. As the Defiant drifted closer to the enigmatic structure, the silence of the void seemed to deepen, the usual ambient noise of the ship subdued by the sheer magnitude of their discovery. The structure's surface gleamed with an iridescent sheen under the sparse light of distant stars, its architecture a labyrinth of interlocking plates and pulsing energy nodes that throbbed with a slow, steady rhythm. "Prepare for a detailed scan. We need to understand its layout and find an entry point," Darius instructed, his gaze locked on the viewing screen where the structure loomed large. The air in the bridge was thick with expectation, each breath carrying a mix of frost and faint metallic overtones, chilling them to the core. Varro, hands poised over the console, initiated the scan. The ship's sensors, usually so reliable, now faltered intermittently, as if confused by the structure's complex energy patterns. "It's like nothing I've ever seen," he muttered, brow furrowed in concentration. "There are layers here, defenses maybe, or mechanisms. It's hard to get a clear reading." The crew was silent, each member keenly aware of the historical moment they were part of. The planning had to be meticulous. Brenner, always methodical, suggested, "We should deploy probes. They can navigate closer and give us real-time data without risking the ship." "Good idea," Darius agreed. "Deploy the probes and set them to relay all data back to us. Let's map out this behemoth." As the small, sleek probes launched from the Defiant, darting toward the structure with graceful agility, their silver bodies disappeared into the shadow of the great construct before their signals beeped back to life on Varro's console. The screen filled with structural data, revealing a network of corridors and chambers that pulsed with unknown energy. "Look at this," Varro pointed at a particular segment of the layout. "There's a central chamber, massive, right at the heart. It's heavily shielded, but it's definitely where we need to go." Darius nodded, processing the information. "That's our target, then. We'll approach using the maintenance corridors. They're less guarded, likely due to lower energy emissions, which should give us cover." The strategy was set. Brenner coordinated the equipment, ensuring everyone was equipped with thermal suits to protect against the severe cold that radiated from the structure. Varro programmed their route into handheld devices, each step calculated to avoid detection or any traps the ancient builders might have left behind. As they suited up, the taste of adventure mixed with the bitter tang of fear, the air vibrating softly around them, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Darius checked his gear, his movements precise, the weight of the suit familiar yet strangely comforting. "Stay sharp, everyone. We don't know what we're walking into," he reminded his team, his voice a steady beacon in the swirling uncertainty. With one last look at the Defiant, the crew exited through the airlock, their bodies tensing as the cold of space seeped through their suits. They moved towards the structure, guided by the pulsating lights of their handheld devices, each step a silent tread in the ocean of stars. As they entered the structure through an unassuming side hatch, the air inside greeted them with an icy caress, the walls of the corridors sleek and smooth, almost organic in their design. The path before them was clear but fraught with unknowns, the heart of the structure a beacon calling them deeper into its secrets. The planning was over. Now it was time for discovery, each step forward a dance with the unknown. The corridors of the alien structure were vast and echoed with the soft clangs of the crew's boots against the metallic floor. Each step seemed amplified in the hushed expanse, the sounds bouncing off the walls and creating a chorus of whispers that followed them as they moved deeper into the heart of the enigma. The air was crisp, carrying a subtle hint of something ancient, a mix of stone and cold metal that filled their lungs with each breath. Darius led the way, his lamp casting long shadows on the smooth, undulating walls that seemed almost to pulse with a life of their own. The path was linear, yet disorienting, with the walls subtly shifting patterns that played tricks on the eyes, creating illusions of depth and motion that could easily disorient anyone not firmly focused on the task at hand. "Keep close and watch your step," Darius instructed, his voice a low growl that barely carried over the soft, eerie echoes that filled the space. The structure is more than it seems. It's designed to confuse, to disorient. Varro nodded, his device in hand, continuously mapping their route and marking their progress. "We're close to the central chamber," he updated, his voice steady despite the surreal surroundings. "Just a few more turns." The crew's breaths appeared as faint clouds in the cool air, dissipating quickly but noticeably in the dim light of their headlamps. The sensation on their skin was tingling, a combination of the cold and the electric anticipation of what they might find at their journey's end. As they approached the heart of the structure, The architecture became more complex, the walls adorned with intricate, geometric patterns that glowed faintly with an internal light. These were not just decorations, but part of the structure's functional design, possibly related to the energy distribution throughout the construct. Suddenly, the corridor opened up into a vast chamber so large that their lamps couldn't find the far walls. The ceiling soared high above, lost in shadows, while the floor was a mosaic of light and dark tiles that created a dizzying, kaleidoscopic effect. "This is it," Darius whispered, stepping into the chamber with a mixture of awe and caution. The air here was vibrant, buzzing with an unseen energy that raised the hairs on their arms. The center of the room held a massive obelisk, its surface smooth and dark, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Varro approached it slowly, his scanner working overtime, its soft beeping the only sound in the otherwise silent chamber. "Look at this," Brenner called out, gesturing to the base of the obelisk where a series of controls lay hidden under a thin layer of dust. "It looks like a control panel. This might be what we're looking for." Darius joined him, examining the panel carefully. "Varro, any readings on what this does?" Varro's scanner beeped more urgently. "It's a power source, but incredibly sophisticated. It's not just generating energy, it's channeling it, possibly controlling something much larger than just this structure." The realization that they were standing in the control room of possibly an ancient alien power station was overwhelming. Darius felt a surge of adrenaline. "Let's see what it controls. Brenner, engage the panel." With a nod, Brenner pressed a series of glyphs, and the chamber responded immediately. The obelisk glowed, a brilliant, piercing light that filled the chamber, illuminating every corner, revealing hidden symbols on the walls that began to shimmer with their own light. As the light from the obelisk spread, the structure trembled softly, the vibration resonating through the floor and into their bones, a sign of activation, of awakening. What they had activated, however, remained a mystery, one that held the answers to the ancient energies pulsing through the void. As the obelisk's glow intensified, the ancient chamber trembled with newfound life, reverberating with the power that had lain dormant for millennia. The crew of the Defiant stood transfixed, their faces illuminated by the pulsing light that now filled every crevice of the vast room. Darius stepped forward, his voice resonant and commanding as he addressed his team. "This is what humanity was guarding," he said, sweeping his gaze around the chamber, where symbols and machinery of unknown origin hinted at a technology far beyond contemporary understanding. A power not meant to destroy, but to protect. Varro, ever the scientist, monitored the readings spiking on his handheld device. "The energy levels are stabilizing," he announced, the awe in his voice mingling with a scientific curiosity that had defined his career. "Whatever this structure is, it's part of a network, possibly a defense mechanism spanning this entire sector of space." Brenner approached the control panel, his hand hovering over the glyphs. "Should we proceed with activation?" His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the magnitude of their discovery. Darius nodded solemnly. "Activate it. Let's see the full extent of what our ancestors left here for us." With a deep breath, Brenner pressed the central glyph. A deep, sonorous tone filled the air, a sound so pure and clear it seemed to resonate with the very essence of the universe. The chamber responded, the walls themselves beginning to shift, revealing panels and screens that flickered to life, displaying star maps and strategic data. "The galaxies. They were never alone," Varro whispered, tracing a finger across a map that highlighted defensive positions and energy conduits that spanned across galaxies. This was humanity's legacy, a safeguard against threats from beyond, hidden in plain sight. As the realization dawned on them, the structure's purpose became clear. It wasn't just a relic. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to humanity's ingenuity and their determination to protect not just their own, but all civilizations from the shadows that lurked in the depths of space. Darius's voice broke the reverent silence. "This is our charge now, to stand guard as they did, to ensure that the darkness does not encroach." He turned to face his crew, their faces lit by the otherworldly glow of the chamber. Humanity may have seeded the stars with life, but they also protected it with their brilliance and bravery. The crew stood shoulder to shoulder, united by the weight of their discovery and the path that lay ahead. They were no longer mere explorers or soldiers. They were guardians, chosen by fate to continue a legacy that spanned eons. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Darius paused, taking one last look at the glowing obelisk. "Let the galaxy mock what it does not understand," he said, his voice echoing off the ancient walls. "We know the truth. Humanity didn't just reach for the stars, they became their protectors." With a final resonant tone from the obelisk, the chamber dimmed, the pathway to the Defiant clear and bright under their feet. They walked back to their ship, not as they had arrived, but as bearers of a mighty truth, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with the knowledge and power of the ancients guiding them. Humanity had indeed left relics, but they were not mere remnants of a forgotten past. They were beacons of hope, fiercely shining in the vastness of space, a reminder that humanity had always, and would always, stand defiant in the face of the dark. As the crew of the Defiant reboarded their ship, the structure they had activated receded into the background, its glow dimming into the cosmos, yet leaving a trail of enlightened understanding. The bridge of the Defiant was silent as they set their course back home, each member of the crew lost in thought, processing the magnitude of their mission's success and the responsibility they now shouldered. Darius stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the star-studded void ahead. The void that once seemed a menacing silence was now a canvas of possibilities, each star a sentinel in the grand scheme of humanity's legacy. "We've done more than discover a relic," Darius began, breaking the silence. His voice filled the bridge, resonant and assured. "We've uncovered a testament to human ingenuity and resolve. This isn't just about our survival. It's about our role as custodians of the light against the dark." Vero nodded, his eyes reflecting a newfound resolve. "The energy network we've activated, it's extensive. It's not just protecting this sector, it's stabilizing it. We're part of something much bigger." Brenner, who had been quiet, finally spoke, his voice imbued with a rare softness. "It makes you think, doesn't it? About all the stories we heard as kids, heroes of the cosmos, guardians against the dark. Turns out, they were all true." The ship hummed beneath their feet, a gentle reminder of their return journey. Darius turned to his crew, his family of explorers bound by shared duty. "This is our legacy now, to continue what was started long before us, to ensure that the darkness never overwhelms the light. We are the guardians now, the defenders of galaxies." As the Defiant sailed through the cosmos, its path illuminated by the network of energy they had helped reignite, a sense of profound duty settled over each crew member. They were no longer mere passengers or witnesses. They were active participants in an age-old narrative of protection and perseverance. The journey back to Earth was uneventful, but filled with a quiet anticipation. Upon entering Earth's orbit, Darius sent ahead their mission's findings, a detailed account of the ancient defense network, now reactivated and ready to defend. When they landed, the world was waiting. News of their discovery had spread, igniting a fire of hope and pride across the globe. Humanity had not only reached the stars, but had secured them, a feat that resonated deeply across continents, cultures, and hearts. At a ceremony held in their honor, Darius spoke, not just as a captain, but as a herald of humanity's enduring spirit. "Today we stand not as conquerors, but as champions. The galaxy once mocked human relics, doubted our reach, our resolve. But we've shown that these relics were not mere echoes of the past, but beacons for the future. Today, the universe listens to humanity's voice, and it is a voice of protection, of hope." As applause thundered around them, the crew of the Defiant stood united, their legacy no longer bound to the confines of Earth, but etched across the cosmos, a legacy of courage and a promise of guardianship. In the annals of human history, this chapter would be remembered as the moment humanity truly became the defenders of the galaxy, their story a beacon for all who navigated the dark, a testament to their tenacity, their brilliance, and their indomitable spirit. Humanity stood defiant, guardians of the stars, the bearers of light against the encroaching dark.